Who is the most badass person to have ever lived? Giles. More weight. Corey was pretty badass. Refused to testify at the Salem witch trials. So they pressed him, i.e., they piled rocks on top of him as torture to force him to testify that his wife was a witch. They piled rock after rock on top of him. His last words were, "More weight." Then he died. Rotmisters. Witold Pilecki. He purposely made himself be caught and thrown into Nazi death camp in Auschwitz to infiltrate it and organize underground resistance and do general recon. He then escaped with another prisoner to fight in Warsaw Uprising. My grandpa Liberatus was working solo on his farm in the 1950s, when both hands were sucked into an auger, slicing them up right to the shoulders. Was able to kick the controls to reverse the blades and get himself out. Then drove himself in a granary truck 45 minutes to the hospital, steering and shifting gears with his knees. Doctors were able to save one arm above the elbow but none of the other. Still worked another 40 years with hooks for arms. Fathered 9 children, 6 after his accident, and harvested 1,000 acres on a 100-year-old family farm. Smoked like a chimney, drank like a fish, ate red meat 3 times a day. Passed away in his sleep 2 days before his 99th birthday. He was a hard man, but absolutely devoted to his family and was a great-grandfather to over 20 grandkids. He taught me about resiliency, resourcefulness and mental toughness. Every grandkid, on their first birthday, got a rocking horse that he built in his workshop using hand tools that he built custom attachments for his prosthetics. I still have mine, from 56 years ago, as a reminder of him when times are tough. Mary Vincent. She had her arms chopped off by a serial killer, was left for dead in a drainage pipe, and somehow got herself to safety and survived. She was able to testify and had him put on death row. Private Desmond Doss. He refused to use a gun but carried 75 men to safety, including 2 of the wounded Japanese soldiers on the other side, and used his medical knowledge to save their lives. He is the only conscientious objector to win the Medal of Honor as awarded by President Harry S. Truman. Joe Medicine Crow. The last warchief of the Crow. He completed all the ritual rites to become warchief while fighting in WW2, which included taking an enemy's weapon, touching an enemy without killing him, leading a war party, and stealing an enemy's horse. He stole 50 from the SS. Galvarino. He was a Mapuche warrior whose hands were amputated by Spanish conquistadors. His response? He rigged blades to his wrist stumps and led a rebellion against the Spanish. Vasily Arkhipov. The man who saved the world. He was a Soviet naval commander, brigade chief of staff, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, who refused to launch a nuclear weapon. The ship he was on required 3 officers to be in agreement to fire the weapon, and only Arkhipov was against it. Despite the potential career and personal repercussions, it's possibly apocryphal, but it's said that he swallowed his key so the weapon couldn't be fired unless he was cut open. Stanislav Petrov also saved the world from nuclear war in the 80s, and that should never be forgotten. But I'd argue that the stakes were higher for Arkhipov, and the threat of nuclear war was much more imminent in the midst of a pissing battle between the Kennedys and Khrushchev. Master Sergeant Roy Benavides. On May 2, 1968, a 12-man Special Forces patrol, which included 9 Montagnard tribesmen, was surrounded by an NVA infantry battalion of about 1,000 men. Benavides heard the radio appeal for help and boarded a helicopter to respond. Armed only with a knife, he jumped from the helicopter carrying his medical bag and ran to help the trapped patrol. Benavides distinguished himself by a series of daring and extremely valorous actions. And because of his gallant choice to join voluntarily his comrades who were in critical straits, to expose himself constantly to withering enemy fire, and his refusal to be stopped despite numerous severe wounds, saved the lives of at least 8 men. At one point in the battle, an NVA soldier accosted him and stabbed him with his bayonet. Benavides pulled it out, drew his own knife, killed him and kept going, leaving his knife in the NVA soldier's body. He later killed 2 more NVA soldiers with an AK-47 while providing cover fire for the people boarding the helicopter. After the battle, he was evacuated to the base camp, examined, and thought to be dead, as he was placed in a body bag among the other dead in body bags. He was suddenly recognized by a friend who called for help. A doctor came and examined him but believed Benavides was dead. The doctor was about to zip up the body bag when Benavides managed to spit in his face to show that he was alive. Benavides had a total of 37 separate bullet, bayonet, and shrapnel wounds from the Six-Oar fight with the enemy battalion. Christopher Lee worked in military intelligence during WW2. The character of James Bond is supposed to be part based on him. Ian Fleming was his cousin. About his war service. From Wikipedia, Lee spent time with the Gurkhas of the 8th Indian Infantry Division during the Battle of Monte Cassino. While spending some time on leave in Naples, Lee climbed Mount Vesuvius, which erupted 3 days later. During the final assault on Monte Cassino, the squadron was based in San Angelo and Lee was nearly killed when one of the planes crashed on takeoff and he tripped over one of its live bombs. Played Count Dracula in a string of popular Hammer horror films. A James Bond villain in The Man with the Golden Gun. Lord Summerisle in The Wicker Man. Saruman in the Lord of the Rings films and the Hobbit films. And Count Dooku in the final 2 films of the Star Wars prequel trilogy. Released a heavy metal album at the age of 88. Has won awards for his metal music. The single he released in his 90th birthday made him the genre's oldest performer. He had a song in the Billboard Hot 100 in December 2013, making him at 91 the living oldest performer to ever chart. Released an EP earlier this year. At 92, if he's not the world's baddest ass, he might still be the world's most interesting man. I think Audie Murphy is up there. For those who don't know, most decorates U.S. soldier including the Medal of Honor. Some of his actions during WW2 include 1. Holding off a Nazi assault with the .50 mounted atop off of a destroyed tank. M10 Jackson I believe. After gaining a battlefield commission, SGT to LT, he had his men fall back and dig in. While on top of the tank he was calling for IDF danger close, pretty much right on top of himself. They got so close when the guy on the other end of the radio asked how close, he said something along the lines of, "Give me a minute. I'll let you talk to one of the bastards." This would last an hour. And he would sustain an injury to the leg and he would repel the attack too. When him and a buddy were in a crater foxhole by themselves, 2 Germans surrendered. Something felt off to him. However, his buddy believed the Nazis stood up to go detain them. Except they gunned him down. So in a fit of rage, he picked up a machine gun, I believed it was, and went on a one-man rampage. After the war, I find one of his actions that speak highly of his character is how he refused to partake in cigarette and alcohol commercials despite financial difficulty, as he was aware of the influence he would have on kids. Charles Upham was a NZ soldier who won 2 Victoria Crosses. He had a reputation of carrying a flour sack full of grenades instead of a rifle. If you read the wiki, It goes through the whole saga that led to his awarding of the first VC and then casually mentions that he was suffering from dysentery at the time. https en.m.wikipedia.org/wiki/charlesupham. Look up Sir Ranulph Fiennes, explorer and all-around badass, and only within the last generation. First to visit both North and South Pole, crossed Antarctica by foot, war hero. During an expedition in the Arctic got frostbite and cut his fingers off with a saw. Had a heart attack in 2000, but ran 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 days 3 years later. Pure iron in my opinion. Teddy Roosevelt was shot in the chest, determined it was not fatal, and proceeded to deliver a speech that lasted over an hour. My grandmother. Her husband died of heart disease in 1948, leaving her to raise 8 children between the ages of 9 months and 13 years old. She was a saint. There are a lot of good people mentioned in here for various reasons, but I'll throw out 2 more. People. First, the unknown Viking at Stamford Bridge. He held off the entire English army until they floated a soldier under the bridge to stab the Viking in the testicles. Dude was straight stacking bodies before getting stabbed in the no-no spot. Second is Norman Borlaug. Norman was not a great warrior but a scientist. He developed a variant of wheat that had a higher yield and wouldn't fall over so harvests would be greater. He has saved countless lives from dying of starvation. Also worthy of consideration, Goyale. Geronimo. One day he came into my quarters at Fort Sill in a most peculiar mood. He told me no one could kill him. Nor me either, if he willed it so. Then he bared himself to the waist. I was dumbfounded to see the number of bullet holes in his body. I knew he had been in many battles and had been fired on dozens of times. But I had never heard of anyone living with at least 50 bullet wounds on his body. Geronimo had that many scars. Some of these bullet holes were large enough to hold small pebbles that Geronimo picked up and placed in them. Putting a pebble in a bullet wound, he would make a noise like a gun. Then take the pebble out and throw it on the ground. Jokingly, I told him he was probably so far away that the bullets didn't penetrate him, but that if he had been nearer they probably would have killed him. No, he shouted. Bullets cannot kill me. Quote, https desperadophilosophy.net/tag/Geronimo bulletwoundsonbody/ Simo Heha. Daniel Inouye. During a World War II assault on a fortified German position in Italy. Gets shot in the stomach. Shrugs it off and takes out 2 machine gun nests. As he's about to lob a grenade to take out a third, his right arm gets nearly amputated at the elbow by enemy fire. Now he's staring at his useless, dangling arm, still reflexively clutching a live grenade. Shouts at his platoon to stay back for fear of the grenade going off. Pries the live grenade out of his useless hand and throws it with his other hand, taking out the German in the bunker. Continues to move forward, killing at least 1 more German before getting shot for the 5th time that day, before falling unconscious. Wakes up to members of his platoon hovering over him. Proceeds to tell them to get back to their positions because nobody called off the war. Quote, has to have his arm amputated without anesthesia at the field hospital. Comes back home, gets awarded a Purple Heart, and eventually a Medal of Honor, yet still gets refused service by a barber because they don't cut Jap hair. Serves his country for 50 more years as a U.S. Senator. While I don't necessarily agree with his politics, I respect the life of service he led. Christopher Lee is a good contender.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Aircast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.